1865 was when the enslavement process was so-called ended. But think about it. Sharecropping, which was where you worked on land, you farmed that land, because remember, we're chiseled, we're built, we're knowledgeable where land is concerned. We're blessed and gifted in that area.
Right.
We work those lands and we pay to harvest our crops. We harvest we do all that work. And even in sharecropping, we pay. And what we are left with is not really enough to sustain us. It's enough to keep us poor and destitute.
Wow. I remember my mom telling me that they had a cotton field, because my mother is from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. They had a cotton field that they worked, but it belonged to them. So my mom used to pick cotton, but they picked it on their own land.
Right. And my mother did too, my grandfather. So the one of the descendants of this woman I'm talking about, those, great grandchildren eventually owned a plot of land that they all lived for, a bunch of years. In fact, the land was sold when my great grandmother was still alive. She sold it and split the money up between my grandmother and her sisters and brothers.
Wow.
But your story, my story, those are far and few between.
Oh, really?
Yeah, not a large number of African American or people of African descent ended up with owning large plots of land in the South because of racism and the kind of racial hate and jealousy and insecurity that was going on. People were lynched for owning businesses.
I saw a lot of that. Wow. Gloria, I'm sorry for interrupting, but it just brings back memories, because a lot of this stuff I see on TV, but I've never, I was born in Eureka, California, and I grew up in Berkeley, and then when my mother and father passed, we sold the house and split up our money. So I'm in Oakland now. So, and I said that to say, I don't know. I've never experienced those other things that people talk about and that I see on TV, and most of it I see on TV, but it just looks so not real. It just looks like a movie.
Exactly.
Because in my mind, I'm thinking, it's not real. It's like, how can this be real? This is just TV.
Yeah. And it's supposed to look like that on TV because we're supposed to believe what Hollywood and TV want us to believe. Like, we're supposed to believe history the way we're taught it in school. I got really blessed because I went to San Francisco State, and I went to San Francisco City College, and I went to San Francisco State. And in order for me to balance out the racial horror and trauma that I was experiencing by the time, and I went to college later, I took African-American history classes all through college. So for 8 years, and there were some semesters that the bulk of my classes were African-American history classes in history, classes in literature, classes in art, classes in history, classes in political science, but all African-American history classes.
Wow.
But from all those different disciplines. So I was born and raised in San Francisco. I went to school. So I grew up in the Fillmore district. I went to school in the Fillmore district, and then we got bused in the 4th grade to the marina.
Oh my!
Now, they didn't call it busing, but we were bused. All of us African-American kids, and we were Negro at the time, or colored at the time.
Yeah, I remember all those faces: Negroes, colors. Now
colored, right? So
Lord have mercy.
We went to our school, the school in my neighborhood, which was 3 blocks from my house, went to the 4th grade. And from the 4th grade, we were all bused, and all of us colored kids were bused. We went to kids' schools in the marina. So you can imagine what that was like.
You know, I remember when I was growing up, I would see well, it started with me being, when I was younger, they would send me, there was a store on Shattuck. I think it was called Crest, one of these department stores, and they had lunch counter. People would give me money and say, go sit at that counter and see if they'll serve you. So I would go in there and just have lunch, and these nice white people would make me, that was my first time having grilled tuna melts. Oh my God, I fell in love with them. So I used to go in there because people would give me money and tell me, go sit and see if you were served, would be served. So I was one of those kids, and I would wonder why my older sisters and brothers, they would call me a token. They said, oh, you're just a token black.
Well, and there was,
I don't care, I'm having fun.
But because you were younger, it was safer for you. Really.
Yeah. Right. Because I never had a problem. I would go everywhere by myself. I'd hop on the bus and go to those places. And most of the time I was the only one at the counter, and, you know, no one ever stopped me from doing anything. So I really didn't, if I ever experienced racism when I was younger, I didn't know it. And when I got older, I didn't know it, and I didn't recognize it until I had a Black son, and he got old enough to start thinking for himself and speaking up. And that's when I started going, oh man, this is just too real and just too close to home, you know?
Yeah. And so frightening.
It is, because I worry every time he steps out the door, you know? I can't sleep.
Yeah. And so like we were talking earlier, right? That's so I jumped ahead, but in Africa, eventually that's what happened. The tribes realized that their people were being captured and stolen. And so you were sent out only in groups. You could only go, so you would go gather, you know, whatever foods or whatever for the good of the whole village. And if you got captured, which many did, that was it. That was it. You wrote that, and think about it. I'm actually writing about some of this, but think about it.
Good.
You are a 13, 14-year-old girl. You get captured. You're on that ship.
Wow.
You're in that dungeon for sometimes up to a month. And then you're placed on the ship and you have your period.
Oh my God.
We don't.
Oh, that's right. We don't think about things like that now because, you know, we're.
Yeah. And that's how injurious, that's how hurtful, that's how
degrading
everything. That's just, there's not even enough words to put to that situation. You're on that ship, you're sick. A lot of people got sick. Sometimes those ships, the people on the ships, the people who were captured, as well as the crew, were so sick that the ship couldn't dock. It would stop out in the water. They would send little boats out. They would douse the ships with kerosene, throw matches on them, throw fire on them, and let them just burn with all the people who were left on them, because of the amount of sickness that was on the ship before it docked. Those are things that nobody, probably in a public high school, would teach me or tell me. Those are things I learned in college, taking African-American history classes. I wouldn't have learned that in a United States history class.
You know, because I've never heard that before. And I started taking African history when I was at Martin Luther King. It was called Garfield, I think it was. Yeah, it was called Garfield in Berkeley. And then I went there the year they changed it to Martin Luther King because he had just been assassinated. And I had this teacher, this Black teacher that taught African American studies. And I swear for the life of me, I hated that class It was so depressing. I got tired of hearing every day that my people were slaves, and it was just, it was mental anguish.
Yeah.
That I just tuned out.
Exactly.
I tuned out. It's like I just couldn't stand hearing it anymore.
Yeah. When I was in college, I had the gift of being in classrooms with Black and white professors who didn't shut me down. That's a real gift when you're in college, right? And I was an older student. You worked already and had a family and all that. And I was a reentry student, right?
Okay.
Well, at one point, I raised my hand in a political science class. It was a class about the I can't even say it, but Jefferson's reign, right?
Okay.
There's a word they used to call Jeffersonian or something. Anyway, we were in that class talking about him, and I raised my hand and I said, it's occurred to me that we're in a institution of higher learning. We're in San Francisco State, which is a world-renowned city. In our own rights, this is a world-renowned campus for many reasons. Don't you think it's time we say African human beings who were enslaved, or African human beings who either did or did not enslave in the human process? Well, the whole classroom started clapping, but the professor just sat there. He said, well, Miss Young, you're right. Only none of my information has that. And so we're just kind of stuck, and I need to apologize. Now, this is how insidious racism is, right? I'm an African-American woman. I'm in an institution of higher learning. It took some years before it clicked in me. And I said, we're in this institution, it's higher learning. We're in a world-renowned city on a world-renowned campus. Wouldn't it make sense if we referred to slavery as the enslavement of African human beings, and if we refer to slaves as, and slavery as the process of the capture and enslavement of African human beings, and the people as African human beings who were enslaved, because it's not rocket science that we're human.
Right. And was this an African-American class?
No, it was a class about Jefferson. So, Jefferson was famous for owning many, many human beings.
Yes.
Lots of literature written about the children he fathered with African women, or women of African descent, or mixed women, women who were fathered by other plantation owners.
Yes, and sold to him.
Exactly. So I said, don't you think it's more appropriate for us to be honest? Like, this is education. We're in school, we're in a university at that.
Right.
Don't you think? And so he said, Miss Young, your point is so well taken, especially by me, because all the people in the class started clapping, right? Because we're in San Francisco State, right? Everybody's clapping when I said that. He said, your point is well taken, and I do agree with you. He said, unfortunately, I got a PhD in this stuff, and so I don't have literature that says African human beings who were enslaved. All I have is books and literature that says the slaves and slavery. And I said, wow. Yeah, he said, but I do have, I'm agreeing with you 100%. You are absolutely right. And so I said, well, we're all in school, we're all learning, so we have a future to build.
Right. And it's amazing that he said, and you pointed out, that the enslaved people, they didn't refer to them as African American or Negro, or they just referred to them as slave people. And that, to me, that sounds psychologically calculated, because they didn't want to admit it. They couldn't bring themselves to say it.
Yeah. Well, they didn't say people. They said the slaves.
They just said the slaves.
Slaves.
Wow,
The
that's
slaves and
sad.
slavery.
You know, to me, that sounds like a guilty person. You know, sometimes we just leave words out, you know, because it makes it more open to interpretation, and it doesn't make us feel so bad.
Exactly. Another symptom of racism.
Yes.
Another very viable, huge component of racism.
Yes.
And so, you know, like I said, I was fortunate. I didn't get shut down and none of that.
Yeah.
But it caused me to start doing what professors were trying to teach me to do, and that was think critically. So
Yeah.
I started to think, well, okay, it might not be in a history book or in a political science book, but it's still true.
It's true.
I can say it.
There you go.
I taught my children, my grandchildren, and when I have great grandchildren, I'll teach them the same thing. And I even told them, I said, now look, when you get to school and they start talking about this, they're going to say words like slavery and the slaves. I need you to raise your hand and say, my grandma said, or my mother said that those were human beings who were taken into an enslavement process.
Yeah.
I said, now you're going to feel a lot of fear, because that's what happens when I've had to do it, right? When I knew I was surrounded by people who were more comfortable,
right,
much more comfortable,
right,
with the enslavement process and receiving the benefits from it.
Yes. And like you said, you know, and another thing, just saying slaves opposed to human beings made it seem more acceptable because they were less than. Slaves were considered less than the human beings. Yeah. Now they wrote that in history, and that's why it's so important for other people, especially people of color, to write about history and slavery, because we know that history is just whoever wrote the book, that's their story. That's right. His story.
That's right.
That's history, his story. So we have to write our own history.
That is accurate. You know, the inaccuracies, all the things that are not accurate are what have allowed racism to be, to stay in place, like racist practices to stay in place, and to keep groups of, especially people of African descent, groups of Black people in this country, to keep us in those financial institutions that don't work.
Yes, I totally agree.
The enslavement of African human beings was a financial institution that did not work for us.
Right, because it was all about benefit and profit. And that's why they had slaves opposed to people, because they had their own people they could hire and pay wages. But they didn't want to give up that money, so they were looking for free, cheap labor.
Yeah, and like I said, they didn't go to Europe and bring back shiploads of people to work this stolen land.
Yeah, you know, it's so sad. It's so sad. And what's even sadder is that this practice of racism, thinking that one is better than the other, continues. And it even, and I can even go so far as to say, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but I've seen racism within the same race.
Well, that's where it's the most hurtful.
You know?
That's where it's the most hurtful. But again, that's how effective the racially motivated, the actions motivated by race, that's how effective it has been. Yes. It has even fostered a practice of racial division between us.
Yes. You know, it's a learned behavior, just like you explained early on, how when Columbus came and he saw the indigenous people, it's learned behavior.
Yes.
It's learned behavior. And within our own race, even knowing it's wrong, from young ages, we know that it's not right, that we do it to each other.
Yes.
That, I think that is sadder than seeing another race do it.
It definitely hurts more.
It hurts more. It hurts more.
Yeah.
And it's very evident.
Yeah.
It's very evident because you think to yourself, well, if I was white, they wouldn't be saying that. Or if I were white, they wouldn't do that.
Right. Yeah.
It's learned behavior.
Yeah. And it's in the part I think that we don't talk enough about is certainly it's the brutality is clear, right?
It's clear, very clear. But like you said, we don't talk about it.
No, we don't talk about it. And we don't talk about the emotional trauma and injury that we suffer.
Exactly. And just because someone doesn't say anything, I know there are a lot of things that I see wrong, and I don't say something about everything, or else it would make me a totally depressed person. You can't, you have to choose your battles. And then also I know that when someone does something wrong, they know it's wrong. And what I say, little old me, is not gonna change them. So I don't speak on everything, but there is a lot to be said.
Yeah, there's so much healing that has to take place, and there's so much truth telling, right? So much explanation without the sugarcoating that has to take place.
Yes.
So much admission that has to take place that has not taken place in many ways to this point, but because of the climate that we're in now, with all the racial reckoning that's going on,
right?
I pray and I predict that history books will be written very different from the ones we read and my children read and my grandchildren are now reading. Like, there's going to be much more clarity in the injuries and the damages that have taken place as a result of racism in this country.
Are the books being written?
I believe, yes. Now, I haven't been in a institution of higher learning in a while, but yes, definitely. People are, like, the stuff we're talking about right now, people are writing. People are writing. I'm writing. I'm writing a piece about being captured, being a young girl captured, and I'm writing in first person.
And we need people like you to write, because you have the knowledge, you have the education, you've done the studies, and I can report it and talk about it, but we need you guys to write it.
Yes.
Because we know that healing starts at home. And when we see racism, especially racism, done to us by other people, we know who they are. We knew that they were capable of it. That's their learned behavior. All we can do is call them out. But it's so much more hateful when we do it to each other. There's got to be an end for that, because I see lots of other races cling together, like Asians cling together. Maybe it's not proper to call them Mexicans, Hispanic people. I wish for our culture that we become a more cohesive culture and cling to each other and support each other. At least as much as those two. And white people do. I don't know why. Maybe it's because of our heritage, because of what we've been through.
The years of being treated poorly and misused and abused for hundreds of years can create the kind of self-hate that we internalize that causes us to devalue us in a bigger way than the system did.
That's what it is. You know, it's what was poured into us, and somehow it just managed to seep a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, and then every now and then it comes out. But we have to, as a people, counteract that and totally flush it out. Yeah. And say, you know, just because they said I am doesn't mean that I am. I'm what I say I am.
Yeah.